Good morning, everybody. Welcome everyone to the CEMA Professional Development Committee's first event of 2022, Coffee with Dr. Smith. My name is Lawrence Michael C. Arias, and I am very glad to be the chair of this committee. Some quick reminders for today's event. To minimize disruptions and interruptions, kindly please make sure that you are muted for this event. We will be recording this and we'll publish this to our CEMA channel on YouTube. If you have any questions, please kindly type them in chat and we will address them during the Q&A session if we have time at the end. If we do not get to your question during the event, we will make sure to send out the responses via email. Now, before I introduce our keynote speaker for today, I would like to just quickly acknowledge and thank the following. First of all, for our Professional Development Committee members, Teresa Chagoya from Employee Wellness, Donna Menzimer from Roads and Airports, Dolores Morales from Probation, Vihar Patel from Equal Opportunity, Robin Rivas Romano from Social Services, and Sandy Monsees, who has recently retired from Learning and Development. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank CEMA Executive Board members, President Dolores Morales, Senior Vice President Carla Collins, Secretary Donna Menzimer, Treasurer Jim Piazza, members at large Jessica Castaneda, Robin Rivas Romano, Mary Beth Rogers, and Laura Romero. And also I'd like to thank and acknowledge our CEMA OE3 staff, Senior Business Agent Zeb Feldman, and Business Agents Adam Cole and Lauren Sue, and our Office Secretary, Nancy Rocha Ortiz. Thank you all for your hard work in helping us with today's event. Now, on October 19, 2021, San Jose Mercury published an op-ed from Santa Clara County Executive Dr. Jeffrey V. Smith titled, "Why Santa Clara County Workers Deserve Hero Pay." In his op-ed, he mentioned during the pandemic, our county employees rose to the challenge of a century and made an enormous difference to the community. And I think they deserve recognition for their sacrifices. A cup of coffee a day is the least we can do. It's a direct quote from Dr. Jeffrey Smith. So now it is my great honor and privilege to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Jeffrey V. Smith. Welcome, Dr. Smith. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. Here's my cup of coffee. Cheers.
Cheers, cheers.
Well, a little bit about the pandemic so far and what a fabulous job our employees have done. As you all know, we activated our EOC 2 years ago. Actually 2 years ago this week. And it was an enormous effort for many, many people, hundreds of employees, to just get the EOC activated and get it going. And then all 12,000 employees actually contributed to the response in one way or the other, either filling in for DSWs who were busy building up vaccination and testing programs, or actually being in the DSW Corps. And I think that that's amazing. If you look at the numbers, and we're talking about a very dangerous virus that actually killed people. If you look over the last 2 years and compare our mortality rates to the rest of the nation and the rest of California, compared to California, we are 1,000 lives saved because of our low rate, because of our great response. That's 1,000 people in this county who were saved by you, and that includes the benefit of all of their families and their lives for the rest of the time period that they're with us on this earth. And I think, you should realize that that's thousands and thousands of people who are affected by your fabulous work. And if you compare us to the nation, it's 2,000 to 3,000 people that were saved. So our special response, which was done by you, saved thousands of people compared to the rest of the nation and the rest of the state. So that's why when Matt Mahan did a letter to the editor, actually an op-ed piece, criticizing our decision to award hero pay, I was deeply, deeply offended. I know our employees, I know how hard they work. I know what they did for this pandemic response. I know what they do even when there isn't a pandemic going on. And I deeply respect you all because you provide the services that hold the fabric of society together. And without you, our society would be a much worse place to live. So I felt that actually I wanted to do more, but because of our regulations and the state and the federal limitations, we were stuck with what we did. And I had no misgivings about it at all. So that's why I wrote the op-ed piece and tried to explain to the public what we do, how important it is what we do, and what we did to the pandemic, through the pandemic. That being said, we have more challenges ahead of us. We are decommissioning many DSWs at this time because the Omicron spike has begun to reduce. So that's great. And we're seeing less infections that require hospitalization. That's great. But the pandemic's not over. And we know that new variants are going to be coming. And we suspect strongly that there'll be need for new vaccinations. So we're not completely decommissioning the emergency response, but we are decreasing it. So we'll be able to get back to a more normal situation, not a normal situation, but a more normal situation. And we'll try to learn every lesson we can from what we did. An important lesson, which we've already started to try to correct, is the fact that for a long-term emergency, we really cannot be stealing DSWs consistently from departments. So we've asked the board and they approved a number of positions to be added in order to have a permanent group of employees who can respond to emergencies when needed. And obviously there's plenty of work to do when they're not needed. We'll start out with a relatively small number of about 200 positions, some of them unclassified positions. We'll reassess what we need and keep moving on if we need more. But those of you who are involved with the response realize that it was a huge logistical effort to steal people from the departments and train them and get them consistently working efficiently and effective. So having a dedicated cohort of employees will be a better thing than in the long run. Also, we learned that we can have teleworking for a number of our employees who can be just as effective and efficient teleworking part-time as being at work all the time. We currently have a teleworking policy which delegates responsibility for the decision-making to the managers. As I've mentioned before, as we get more stability in the organization, we'll have to sit down with the unions and see if we need to change that policy. We'll probably have differences of opinion, but it's worth relooking at it. Also, we learned that people and our employees liked working cross departments, cross priorities, cross activities. And we started the 10% plan with CEMA a number of years ago and found that it was very helpful. But the pandemic response with DSWs reemphasized how helpful it was. So we're going to have to talk with unions about how we can have designated time for employees to work in other departments, doing other things, working cross silos, because that helps the organization and it helps the employee and keeps everybody engaged. That's just three things that we've learned. So again, I want to really thank everyone for everything they did. Without you, we really couldn't have made any progress. We did better than any large county in the nation in our response, and therefore saved more lives than any large county in the nation. And we should all be very proud of that. So with that, Lawrence, I think we'll open it up to questions.
Thanks so much, Dr. Smith. Okay, so let's see. So everyone, please go ahead and type in your questions in chat so that we can go ahead and respond to them in order. And I believe if we can also have CEMA Executive Board Secretary Donna Mensimer read those questions out to us, that would be much appreciated.
All right. So far we have one question, so hopefully they keep coming. Heesung is asking, with the potential economic outlook not looking good, how or what can county provide for employees to offset the cost of living increases? One example, increased telework where possible to reduce energy costs, gas/electricity.
Great question. Right now, we are doing our budget for next year. And as I said during the mid-year budget review a few weeks ago with the board, we're really concerned about balancing the budget this year. We will not be having any reductions, but we will have to reassess some of our projects, particularly facilities projects and some of the TSS projects, because even though we have stable property tax coming in, we have spent over $1 billion on our pandemic response, and we won't be getting reimbursement from FEMA or some of the other relief funds for some time. So we have a cash flow issue, which can be very significant. Also, with the changes going on in the health system and CalAIM and the reimbursement changes, their payment for their bills is being delayed. So our accounts receivable in the hospital are significantly delayed, which also causes more problems with the cash flow. So we're going to be pretty tight this year. We will be looking consistently at teleworking, and we're also looking at ways that we might be able to help employees with cost of living increases. But many of those things are going to take some time to do. So I hope that gives you an answer.
All right. The next one is, it says from Zeb, but I think he's actually kind of summarizing a bunch of questions from our CEMA members. CEMA members are very interested in expanded telework, specifically for knowledge workers and supervisors like CEMA staff. Given the competitive hiring advantages, savings on commute, a lowered county real estate footprint, and higher morale, what enhancements to telework do you see in the future, if any, for CEMA type workers?
Well, yeah, again, I don't want to get too much into specifics because all that needs to be negotiated at the bargaining table. I don't want to get accused of direct dealing, but I do think that we can reevaluate the current policy, and CEMA has presented a number of suggestions. Some of them I can get behind, some are a little extravagant, but I think they're knowledge workers, particularly managers and TSS and some other workers who can pretty easily work from home should have more teleworking through the week. And from my perspective, we have to balance that with the benefits of actually being at the office, in the sense that we have found during the pandemic that it's very hard to keep community morale up, and that people lose something by not being able to see or talk to their family at work. And it's not always possible to schedule a simple visit on Zooms or Microsoft Teams. So there are some competing priorities. We'll try to reassess at the bargaining table what we think we can do.
Okay, thank you. Karen Grog asks, oops, if single payer was ever passed by the state legislatures in the county, considering any is the county considering any contingency planning for employee retirement health insurance contracts?
Well, we're, I think, sadly, quite a long ways away from single payer at the state level. I'm very supportive of it, but there's a lot of opposition because of the health industry, which sees their industry in the private sector as a profit-making modality. And single payer, excuse me, just a second. I don't have COVID, I just have postnasal. So, they see their job as making profit, and that's a negative incentive, and certainly contrary to what the county's priority is. Our priority is spend our revenue efficiently on our employees and on our clients so that we can get a good result. But I think the question of how will that change retiree health or retirement still is one that's up in the air. Single payer theoretically would take away the requirement for retiree health, but of course that all needs to be negotiated with the unions. I don't think, in a perfect world, I think what that would mean is we would talk about transferring that cost to other benefits for the employees, in the way of maybe salaries or a cafeteria approach to benefits or some other effect, which obviously would have to be negotiated. But to that extent, we don't really have a plan administratively except to watch what happens at the state level and be prepared to go to the negotiating table to address it.
With current processes depending on a department's director management, is there any way to include someone from HR or the union to help deliberate work from home policies within a department?
Well, again, I think we will negotiate an overall change in the policy, and as part of that, I would suspect we would come up with a model for how we make decisions. Obviously, from administrative perspective, and almost all of you being managers, there needs to be input from people on the ground trying to manage the services and manage the need. And their input needs to be heard very loudly. Obviously, there also needs to be input from the employee and the employee's representative union. How we actually end up doing that, I think, remains to be seen at the negotiating table.
Okay. Let's see here. With gas prices increasing daily, are there efforts to increase electric vehicle charging stations at various county employee locations like Silver Creek? I believe Tesla will even install charging stations free of cost.
Yeah, we have a consistent policy to install charging stations and photovoltaic cells so that we can save on energy and try to use renewable as much as possible. We have a lot of properties, a lot of employees, a lot of different locations. So it's not going to be a quick process to cover all of our employees, but we have focused on the high density locations like 70 West Heading and the hospital and clinics and some of the fleet and facility areas and Charcot. But we do have a plan to expand, and we will expand.
Thank you very much. I'd like to know how they plan on using the data from the recent survey to address the trauma this organization has endured during the pandemic. Specifically, how are they working towards creating a culture of change to help employees, managers, and executives so that they can be more present in their work?
Great question. We did a pulse survey, which is just one that has a few questions in order to try to get a sense of how much damage the pandemic had done. And we've seen preliminary results. Once we have the final results, we'll obviously make that public. But the reality is that it has caused a lot of problems with people's attitude toward work, their attitude toward life. It has indeed pushed our employee community toward the great resignation, in the sense that a lot of people are thinking seriously about retirement, and they're reassessing their work-life balance. We have hired a couple of consultants to help us with developing a training process and with support. Excuse me. So we will be expanding our online and in-person support for employees who need it. I mean, psychological and psychosocial support. The exact details of that, I can't tell you right now because we're still working on it, but we realize that we need to be in every department, and every department's going to need a different spin on it, because we found in the survey that some departments are particularly more affected than others. So we're reaching out into the employee group more than, EAP is always available, but that's been a sort of passive receptive model. We're going to actually reach out into the departments and be more active and aggressive in trying to promote support.
Okay. There's a question about adding permanent positions. With the growth of HHS, adding OCH and St. Louis and more clinics, how can departments request more full-time positions within a department?
Well, as I said, we're going through our budget process right now, and the departments have put in their requests. And even though I told them not to be greedy, they requested $185 million worth of new projects and 743 new positions. We won't be able to do 743 new positions economically, but VMC is one of the departments that's going to get a significant number of new positions to deal with eliminating some significant number of the registry and temporary workers, as well as to deal with the new expansion. Our census has increased pretty dramatically in all three hospitals. When we bought O'Connor, it was around 120 a day. It's now pushing 200 a day. Inpatients, St. Louis used to be about 20 to 25 a day. It's now into the 50 or 60 range consistently, and sometimes going up to 80. Remember, it only has physically 90 beds, so it's pretty busy in the emergency room. Then all three hospitals are very busy. very busy indeed. So we're planning on expanding staff. And as you know, we've got plans to expand VMC's ER physically and also to expand St. Louis ER. So we'll be adding staff, not just clinical staff, but also support staff in those areas. But we're going to have to be very careful that we may match staffing with revenue because, as I mentioned, we have unreliable state and federal revenue at this point.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, how long do you anticipate the mass vax testing sites to continue? Do you plan to make these plans past 2023?
Well, that's a great question. That requires a bit of a crystal ball. We are currently downsizing them significantly. I think the last numbers I saw was that we were doing about 1,000 vaccines a day among all of the mass vac sites. We were at a high point around 8,000 or 9,000. So we've sent DSWs back to their work, and we're making preparations to decrease the capacity. I don't think we can afford right now to completely eliminate capacity or decommission the entire process because we don't really know what's going to happen in the near future. But we will try to push testing and vaccinations into the clinics, into private clinics, and get more help from surrounding health systems. Testing is a particularly interesting issue. The need for testing hasn't really decreased, but the demand has decreased. And we're pretty sure most of that decrease has to do with the availability of antigen testing. And as you know, the federal government has even extended more capacity to individuals to apply for antigen tests and get them delivered to your home, as well as all the health systems. Health insurance allows that. And we have been passing out antigen testing to many members of the public and also to our employees. So I suspect that PCR will continue to be in less demand and the antigen test will be in more demand. Unless, of course, it turns out that the next variant doesn't show up on the antigen testing, which is possible.
Okay. Do you regret ambushing the county at the Board of Supervisors meeting and removing all unoccupied positions in an attempt to save money, knowing that these positions are somewhat responsible for the hero bonus that you then handed out to overworked employees that were left? All agencies are trying to make do with critical staffing shortages that affect budgets. Are those removed positions going to be returned to all departments affected?
A bit of a loaded question. No, I don't regret it, and I didn't surprise the board. They knew it was coming. And the issue is that anytime we have long-term vacancies or vacant positions, they're not actually doing any work because they're vacant. There aren't people there doing the work. What happens oftentimes is that the revenue that's allocated for those positions is then used for other purposes, oftentimes for overtime. And what we've decided at the central level is that it's better to recognize the overtime and fund the budget units with additional funding for overtime rather than to have vacant positions become essentially unfunded because there's no remaining money in the object one. So we will continue to eliminate long-term vacant positions because they're not providing services. but we will focus on using specific funds for overtime. The issue about whether we will replace VSIP positions is a slightly different issue. Some of those positions have already been replaced. There might be some more in this upcoming budget, but we're asking the departments to be thoughtful and make sure that they actually need them. Many of the positions were positions that were created long ago, and the workers are doing different kinds of activities. So we have a lot of reclassifications going on. So we're thoughtful about making sure that our position structure is up to date and clearly consistent with what we need in the community.
Thank you. The next question is formed in a statement, but it'd be interesting to see what the county, if the county has any plans for this. I am more concerned by our SEIU staff who do not have much of an ability to telework, having to spend their lower salaries to get to work in a climate of increasing gas prices. Does the county have any plans to address that?
Well, we have the negotiations for SEIU coming up, and I suspect we'll be addressing that in those negotiations. This last time around, as many of you are aware, the county put additional funding into the lowest paid jobs in SEIU. And so that was an effort to try to build equity and response to the community need. And I suspect we'll be discussing that again. Again, I don't want to get into details because we'll have to negotiate that at the bargaining table. But we are aware that there are a lot of positions which really can't telework. You know, you can't be a road worker and telework, or a nurse, or an HSR, or social worker, or maintenance crew worker. And we do have a consistent problem with SEIU workers who are at the bottom of the pay scale because it's so difficult to make a living in this community.
Okay. Knowing COVID is likely with us long term, how is the county and HHS looking to adjust the environment to ensure there are break areas, especially during inclement weather, social distancing in the office, and increased cleaning?
Hard question, because much of that requires physical changes in the buildings, and that's a very difficult thing to do in hospitals and clinics because of a number of factors, OSHPD, well, what used to be called OSHPD, and other regulatory requirements. The answers are probably going to be in some temporary structures to be able to give people break time, break rooms that are away from their work, but then that causes problems with transportation and mobility time. So don't have a great answer to that. I think the best answer right now is vaccinations.
How long will the county keep masking and building restrictions, restrictions on gathering and eating, and so on within county buildings?
I think we will wait at least for a couple of months to see whether there's another spike of another variant, and then we'll start planning on figuring out how we can decrease the level of masking reasonably. We have a huge population of employees that work in the health system, and I don't see that changing rapidly, but the office workers probably can be safer without masks as long as we have continued low rates of infection. But, I think that Omicron taught us that we can always be surprised. It was a high spike, a rapid spike, a dangerous spike. Although vaccinated individuals were relatively protected because it was very contagious, a lot of people got infected anyhow. And certainly the unvaccinated were the ones who ended up in the hospital. So it really depends on how the progression of the pandemic happens.
With historic inflation, do you expect the county and board to budget for higher wage increases in upcoming negotiations than those we've seen in recent years?
Again, that's a issue on the bargaining table, but I'm sure that will be brought up significantly by both sides, and we'll have to address it. That's the best I can probably say.
Okay. Dr. Smith, I appreciate your thoughtful attention to inclusion and diversity. Do you have a vision of how the county can continue to address equity and inclusion in hiring, promoting, and general culture?
Great question. As you know, we've created a Office of Equity, and we are focused on coordinating the countywide response to race and equity problems that we have. But fundamentally, the problem is a social economic problem in our entire society, and has to do with the fact that a capitalist society that's predatory forces some people to the bottom of the opportunity ladder. And we really need to work on improving the opportunities that people have, not only in the county, but also in the entire community. So we've been meeting in a number of forums to try to come up with strategies to deal with that. Fundamentally, it's an overwhelming problem where we have to pick our battles carefully and strategically. We're not going to be able to solve every problem all at one shot, but we're trying to focus on hiring and promotions and requiring some evaluation of equity actions in the budget so that each department comes up with an equity plan in their department, not only related to their employees, but to their clients. As many of you know, we've spent a lot of time over the last 20 years trying to deal with our disparity problem in the jail and juvenile hall. We've made progress in juvenile hall in the sense that we've decreased the census from about 350 when I started down to about 60 kids in juvenile hall. That will expand a little bit in the near future because of changes in the youth authority at the state level. But we haven't really changed the percentages significantly. There's still an overrepresentation of African American and Latinx populations in the juvenile hall. And the same is true in the jail. We've found that we can probably succeed with a census in the jails of probably in the 2,000 range. A few years ago, it was in the 4,500 range. But we're having challenges still with disparity issues, and much of that has to do with the community and coordination between the police and the courts and probation and us. I mean, we can't unilaterally change the equity issues in the jail, but we're trying to figure out ways to do that. And in addition to that, we need to expand our workforce capacity for cultural competency and language capacity. So we're focused on strategic issues that we can accomplish, realizing that the overwhelming prejudice and disparity in the community is going to be a real struggle to deal with. I think our basic job as a county is to deal with the problems of inequity and disparity and lack of opportunity in many forums. So that's our job, and we need to focus on that and need to be aware that that's our job.
Okay. Thank you. What is the county doing to expand broadband and cell service for the rural areas that have old infrastructure or no cell phone service?
Well, the board's asked us to explore options for broadband. Most of those efforts will have to be done in coordination with the state, the federal government, and or the private providers. We can't really do it ourselves. We don't have the capacity or the funding to do that, or the expertise. So we're going to have to join with the feds. Luckily, the feds and the state have also recognized the problem, and they're putting funding into projects to try to increase capacity. I think the challenge will be that the private sector also sees this as a problem because it means lost business. So there will be competition for broadband in the private sector, and the question is, how fast will that happen? I don't know the answer.
The crystal ball. Is there any plans to assist county employees with purchasing a home within the county? It is difficult for employees to compete with employees from the high-tech industry that overbid homes with company stock.
At this point, we don't have any plans for that. It really would be cost prohibitive, with 22,000 employees. There's not much we could do for housing unless we created a needs program, and then that would cause significant problems because everybody's in need. So our basic approach to that point is try to create as much affordable housing as we can. We've had great success with building affordable housing because of the $1 billion that taxpayers gave us to do that, and we've leveraged that for some additional affordable housing, but I don't see a subsidy on the horizon.
Okay. We have a few questions left. I'm trying to put them in little chunks of things. So with the joining of DEH to the Public Health Department, is the vision to increase more activities of public health to the community?
Say the last sentence for me, please, again.
Is it the vision to increase more activities of public health to the community?
Yes, we've been expanding public health itself, and we expanded our outreach from public health using community resources to knock on doors, and we see that happening more in the future, and using more employees to do that. We also are expanding our capacity to monitor diseases, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to move environmental health in, because many of the disease vectors are currently monitored by environmental health, and the public health officer is the person who delegates the authority to environmental health to deal with those the spread of those infections, foodborne infections, animal-borne infections, other kinds of infections. That means that we also need to expand within CEPA our sustainability capacity, because sustainability is a critical issue, and we have much more to do locally than we can. So I see public health expanding and sustainability expanding.
Okay. So we have about 15 minutes left. I have 3 questions on staffing and then 2 questions on our environment and culture. So staff retention is a huge issue. Losing staff to other agencies that provide work from home, other agencies that ensure that managers have their performance reviewed, not just line staff, and hold leadership accountable for retaliation, lack of timely responses are key factors. The work is hard and traumatic. What is the county doing to address upper managers and executive leaders in departments that are seeing high levels of resignations or transfers out due to a toxic working environment?
I think the answer is that it depends on the particular department and the particular service. We are actively working with custody regarding the correctional officer capacity and deputy sheriff capacity, but that's not what you're really talking about. We do have certain departments where, let's say, executives aren't necessarily living up to the expectations. That requires one-to-one communications. All of the things that were mentioned in the question are required to be done. We have inconsistency with actually how they're being done. So as we progress post-pandemic, we're going to be asking people to do a lot more since there's less that needs to be done with regard to the pandemic, but do a lot more in terms of improving the culture and community in departments and making sure that evaluations are done appropriately and support is provided appropriately.
Thank you. CEMA staff are often impacted by most county staffing issues, such as SEIU strike pre-COVID, covering DSWs, covering and ensuring things ran during COVID. What steps do you anticipate taking to regularly hear from us on how we feel things are running?
Well, I regularly meet with the executive board, and we do that once a month. And so I expect to hear the messages there. Most of the time, the meetings are pretty congenial. Every once in a while, we have a disagreement of significant proportions. But I'd look for direction from the executive team about how much they want to meet, how much they want to tell me, and how they think is best to communicate the members' concerns to me. Certainly willing to do more of these video chats or to show up at general meetings, general membership meetings. The challenge that always occurs is that many of the issues or questions are individually based or based on particular part of the county operation or a particular department. It's hard in those large meetings to address those, but I'm open to whatever suggestions that the executive meeting or executive board has.
All right, that means come to the site meetings and let us know so we can bring it to Jeff.
Okay, that's fine.
Some departments lost a disparate number of positions during layoffs, i.e. public safety, justice, county exec's office. As the county adds positions back, we're not seeing disparate positions being added back to those departments. This hit the sheriff's department very hard. Where are we going to recruit to the academy? Oh, wait. We're going from recruiting to the academy to training takes years. What is the path forward for public safety funding?
Well, as I mentioned in the budget that will be formally proposed to the board in May, there will be recommendations for funding for lateral transfers, and we are in the midst of negotiations for a side letter with DSA and CPOA regarding retention steps and other strategies to try to keep the current people in positions and attract others through transfer. I think it's very obvious that we're not going to fix the problem with academies. Academies typically produce somewhere in the region of 20 new employees per academy, and we have hundreds of vacancies, so that's not going to work. And we will continue academies and we'll try to increase the number of academies, but that cannot be the only thing that we rely upon for filling those positions. So we're looking at other strategies. And just last week, the board approved her adding, I guess it was last Tuesday, 2 days ago, seems like years ago, adding positions to custody, and we expect to have another proposal, which won't probably be in budget, but it'll be off budget for additional positions. And we're trying to deal with the sheriff's administration about how to do that. Obviously, the frustration and consternation about what's going on with the leadership in the sheriff's office has impeded communication and planning, but we're hopeful that we can solve that problem quickly.
Thank you. So we'll move on to some culture and environment. We have about 8 minutes left. Beyond telework, can you speak to the work culture and environment that you envision for employees as we create our new normal?
Well, all along for the last 12 years that I've been here, I've been focused on CLT and team decision-making and mutual respect and empowering employees. That effort took a big negative hit during the pandemic, mostly because I think people were so stressed and there was so much pressure. They felt unappreciated, and I understand that. I felt damaged myself by the entire effort. So we will work again to rebuild. As I mentioned, we're starting with trying to provide support. The reality of humans is that until you feel safe, it's hard to change culture. You know, it's Maslow's triangle. You have the basic needs, and then it's not until you have your basic needs fulfilled that you're able to focus on transformation and higher level activities. So we're going to have to build from the bottom up again, and that will take a lot of effort from CEMA and from the executives, because as I've mentioned before, mid-level managers, CEMA members, really have the pulse of the operations of the county on their hands every day, and they know the needs that the line staff have. They know the imperatives that will change culture, and it's up to executives to be supportive. That has been broken to some extent, so we have to rebuild it.
Thank you. The pandemic is still here, and you, like us, have been overworked and it feels relentless. Can you offer any tips you use to incorporate self-care and well-being into your daily routine?
Oh man, I wish I was good at it. I'm not very good at it. I can play the doctor role and say, do as I say, not as I do. Better exercise, more frequent, even if it's small, sleeping better, focusing on your relationships with your family and your support system so that they are there to support you. Trying to have a positive outlook, positive intelligence, that realize that we'll all make it through this and we'll end up in the end better off. But being candid with you, I have real troubles doing that myself. I'm quite frustrated with some of the efforts that we end up doing politically that make very little sense to me. But, you know, it's a matter of persistence and learning and being humble about it. So that's the best I can offer.
Okay. We have 4 minutes left and 2 additional questions came in. GIS is a new technology to allow the department executives to focus on the vital services provided to the public. In the past, all county GIS staff had a review, reclass, and one county department is forgotten in the process. Would the county revisit this matter again for all county departments so that its employees do not have to request for a job study individually?
Well, I didn't realize somebody was left out, so I'll talk with Emma about it and make sure that we do that. Yes.
Would you like a name?
Yeah, pick a name, give me a name.
Bob Nguyen is who submitted the question, so I'm assuming it may impact him.
Okay, Bob,
was,
maybe Bob can send me an email. Let me know the details.
All right. And the last one was just a response on the affordable housing. It said affordable housing excludes many county workers. Perhaps consider a county employee home buyer program where the employee pays back the down payment over a period of time.
We'll talk about that in negotiations, I'm sure.
All right. Well, that's the last question I have. Thank you very much, Dr. Smith.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Donna, for moderating all those questions. That was really amazing. And thank you so much for doing that. Dr. Smith, before we wrap it up, I just wanted to see, do you have any other statements you'd like to make or anything else that you'd like to add before we close up today's event?
Well, just to reemphasize how much I respect all of our employees and all of CEMA. I know that sometimes we get cattywampus, sometimes we have different priorities. I know that with an organization of 22,000 employees and thousands of services, you know, there are always competing priorities, and sometimes we need to make choices that make some group unhappy or don't satisfy all the needs. So the more input I can get, hopefully the better decision making I can make. And so that's why I value meeting with the executive board on a regular basis so that I can get your input. So thanks very much for the opportunity to meet today, and feel free to invite me back anytime. And I'm happy to meet with you at any location.
Thank you. From your mouth to God's ears. Thank you again, Dr. Smith. We're going to take time out of your very busy schedule to come speak to the CEMA members. So on behalf of the CEMA membership, executive board, and OE3 staff, we truly appreciate you championing us. And we're so very grateful for our continued good working relationship with you.
Thank you very much.
To all of our members and guests joining us today, thank you all so much for being here. We know too how busy you all are. So we appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you for your questions, thoughtful questions, and your kind and patient attention. We hope you learned something new today. So from the rest of the team, have a great rest of the week, everyone. Thank you again, Dr. Smith. Have a great week and weekend. Stay safe and well, everybody.
Lawrence, can somebody send me a copy of all the chat comments so that I can review them, make sure that I addressed and benefited from all of them?
Absolutely, will do.
I sure can.
Thank you, Donna.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
again. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Lawrence, Michael, I'm stopping the recording now and I'll edit this last section out.
Thank you so much. Thank you.